This video will discuss triads and inversion. A triad is said to be in root position if the root is the lowest sounding note. And the lowest sounding note is called the bass. In this example, we have a C major triad in closed root position. C is the root of the triad. C is also the bass. And even though we're in treble clef, the C is also called the bass note because it is the lowest note. Any member of a triad may be doubled without affecting the quality of the triad. In other words, you can have more than one root, you can have more than 1/3, you can have more than 1/5. The notes above the bass note can be arranged in any way. And if the lowest sounding note, in other words the bass, is the root, this triad is in root position. So when we look at these examples, we have C, E, G spread out across the grand staff. C is the lowest note, so this is a C major triad in root position. In this example, C, E, another C, and a G, so we still have C major with the root being doubled. C is the lowest note, C is the bass, so root position. C, E, G, C, C. So in this chord we've got 3 roots, 1/3, 1/5. C is the lowest note, so this is a C major triad also in root position. Triads in music don't always appear in root position, however. If either the 3rd or the 5th is the lowest sounding note, the triad is said to be in inversion. When the 3rd is in the bass, or when the 3rd is the bass note, the triad is in first inversion. When the 5th is in the bass, the triad is in second inversion. So in this example, C, E, G, it's still a C major triad. E, the 3rd, is the lowest note, so this is a C major triad in first inversion. In this example, C, E, G, this time the 5th is the lowest note, so this is a C major triad in second inversion. Triads are labeled using figured bass numerals, which are derived from the distance of the chord members from the bass note. And figured bass is a practice which originated in the Baroque era, so approximately 1600 to 1750, the era when Bach was a major composer. And at that point it was a means of labeling a bass line so that a keyboard player would know what chords should be played above the bass line, as keyboard players improvised above a bass line, much like playing from a lead sheet in jazz. Presently, these figured bass numbers are used more as a means of analyzing music and quickly seeing what chord it is and what inversion the chord is in, rather than improvising from them. For more information on figured bass, there are a couple of good readings that will outline in more detail than I am doing now. For our purposes at this point, you can just think of these figured bass numerals as a shorthand for labeling the chords. So the distance from the bass note to the top note in a root position triad is a 5th. The distance from the bass note to the middle note in a root position triad is a 1/3. So the figured bass shorthand for a root position triad is 5/3. The triad doesn't have to be in closed position to be in root position. So, as we said before, as long as the lowest note in the triad, or the bass note in the triad, is the root, the triad is in root position. First inversion. The distance from the bass to the top note in a first inversion triad is a 1/6. And from the bass to the middle note in a first inversion triad is a 1/3. So the figured bass for a first inversion triad is 6-3. As with root position triads, as long as the lowest sounding note, as long as the bass note is the third, the triad is said to be in first inversion. And in these examples, they're all C major triads. The lowest note is an E, an E, an E. Doesn't matter what's going on above here. It can be all craziness and lots of doublings. As long as this lowest note is the third of the triad, this is a first inversion triad. Second inversion, the distance from the bass to the top note in a second inversion is a sixth, and the distance from the bass to the middle note is a fourth. So the figured bass shorthand for a second inversion triad is 6-4. As with every other position of triads, as long as the lowest note or the bass note of the chord is the fifth of the triad, then this is a triad in second inversion. These are all C major triads. The fifth of a C major triad is a G, and we notice that all three bass notes are G's, so all of these examples are C major triads in second inversion. The figures for root position and first inversion triads are usually abbreviated in common practice. So for a root position triad, both of these figures are usually left off, so that when you see a triad with no numerals elaborating the triad, it is assumed to be a root position triad. The figure for a first inversion triad is commonly shortened to just the 6, so you can leave off the 3. So a triad in first inversion, if you see just the 6, that is appropriate. And 6-4 for a second inversion triad is always used in its entirety. Now, how to go about analyzing a triad which is in inversion. When you are presented with a chord in inversion or with doublings or both, it is important to rearrange this chord until you get to a closed root position triad to be able to accurately analyze it. It doesn't matter where on the staff you do this rearranging, because this is just working it out on scratch paper. It has no implications for anything in the real triad, because what you have to remember is this is what you're working with. This is just thinking on paper, like showing your work in math. So in this example, we have a C and a second C, so the C is doubled. A G goes here, another G, and an E. But what you notice is that I've got them rearranged so that they are stacked thirds. That's the key. If you have 1/3 and a 4th, then you've got to try it in inversion, and you need to do a little bit more rearranging. Keep rearranging on the staff until you get a 1/3 and a 1/3. And then you know for certain you have a root position triad, so that this is the root, this is the 3rd, and this is the 5th. Here are some more examples. In this example, we have a C and an E and an E and another E and an A. So when this is all squished down into a root position triad, we have an ACE, or an A minor triad. Once you have that determined, go back and look at the low note. C is the lowest note. In the A minor triad, the C is the 3rd. When the 3rd is in the bass, you have a first inversion triad. So this is an A minor triad in first inversion, and it can be written as lowercase a for minor with the designator 6 for first inversion. In this example, All of these notes condense themselves down to E, G sharp, and B, an E major triad. Go back. B is the bass note. In the E major triad, B is the fifth. So this is an E major triad in second inversion, or an E 6/4 is how that would be labeled. This triad A, C sharp, F, C sharp, and F condenses down to an F augmented chord. The A is the lowest sounding note, and the A is the third. So we have an F augmented triad in first inversion, and this would be labeled as uppercase F for augmented, the plus sign also for augmented, and then 6 designates first inversion. And our final example is G, B flat, a second G, and a D flat, which is a G, B flat, D flat, G diminished chord. The bass note is the G, in other words the root. So this is a G diminished triad in root position, and would be labeled with lowercase g for diminished, and then the diminished degree sign.